The night air was cold and sharp as I made my way home. The streets were empty, save for the occasional stray cat darting between parked cars. My breath formed little clouds in front of me, dissipating into the darkness. I pulled my coat tighter around me, trying to fend off the chill. It was late, much later than I usually stayed out, but tonight had been an exception. The dinner with old friends had stretched on longer than expected, filled with laughter and reminiscences. I quickened my pace, eager to get home. The familiar streets that usually felt safe now seemed ominous under the dim streetlights. I turned onto Maple Street, a shortcut that would get me home faster. The houses here were dark, their occupants long asleep. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, quickening to match my pace. My heart began to race. I glanced over my shoulder, and in the dim light of the street lamps, I saw a shadowy figure gaining on me. Panic surged through me. I started to walk faster, but the footsteps only grew louder, closer. "Hey!" A rough voice called out. I didn't dare turn around again. I broke into a run, my heels clacking loudly on the pavement. The footsteps behind me quickened too, and I knew I couldn't outrun whoever it was. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back. I stumbled, letting out a cry. "Let me go!" I shouted, struggling against the grip. The man was strong, his fingers digging into my arm painfully. I could see his face now, twisted into a sinister grin. "Quiet," he hissed. "This won't take long." Before I could scream, a figure lunged at my attacker, knocking him off balance. The stranger moved with lightning speed, delivering a swift punch to the man's face. My attacker let go of me and staggered back, clutching his nose. The stranger advanced, and the man turned and fled into the darkness. "Are you all right?" the stranger asked, turning to me. I was still shaking, trying to catch my breath. In the dim light, I could see his concerned eyes and tousled hair. Yes, I think so," I stammered. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "It's no problem. I'm just glad you're safe." He smiled, and there was something familiar about him. I stared at him for a moment, my mind racing. Then it hit me. "Richard?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked surprised. "Do I know you?" "It's Eleanor," I said. "We went to school together. I haven't seen you in years." His face softened with recognition. "Eleanor? Well, it has been a long time." I glanced around nervously. "We should get out of here. Come with me. It's not far to my aunt's house, and I don't want to scare my parents by coming home with a stranger." "Of course," he said. "Lead the way." We walked in silence, the events of the night still weighing heavily on my mind. Richard's presence was comforting, though. I couldn't believe I had run into him after all these years, and in such strange circumstances. We reached my Aunt Josephine's house, a large, imposing mansion that looked even more formidable in the moonlight. "Wow, this place is impressive," Richard said, glancing up at the grand facade. "It's my aunt's," I explained. "She's quite wealthy. I'm just staying with her for a while." I led him inside, the warmth of the house enveloping us as we stepped into the grand foyer. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of a distant clock. I could hear Josephine's footsteps echoing from the hallway. "Eleanor, is that you?" she called out. "Yes, Aunt Josephine," I replied. "I had a bit of an incident, but I'm okay. This is Richard. He helped me." Josephine appeared, her eyes widening as she saw Richard. "Oh my goodness, Richard, is it really you?" Richard looked confused. "I'm sorry, have we met?" Josephine shook her head, a strange expression on her face. No, but you look just like—" Come to the living room. We need to talk." We followed her into the lavishly furnished living room where she gestured for us to sit. "Richard, you remind me so much of my son, Henry. You could be twins." Richard and I exchanged puzzled glances. "Twins?" he asked. "But I don't have any siblings. I was adopted." Josephine's eyes softened. "Yes, you were. But there's something you need to know. Henry, my son, was also adopted, and he had a twin brother who was adopted by another family." Richard's eyes widened in shock. "You mean I have a twin brother?" Yes, Josephine said softly. Henry is your twin. I've always wondered what happened to you. I never thought I'd find you like this. At that moment, Henry entered the room, his eyes widening as he saw Richard. It was like looking into a mirror. What's going on? He asked, his voice trembling. Josephine smiled gently. Henry, meet your brother Richard. The shock of the revelation hung heavy in the room. Henry and Richard sat across from each other, mirroring each other's stunned expressions. I watched from the side, my own emotions a mix of disbelief and curiosity. The silence stretched on until it became almost unbearable. This is unbelievable, Richard finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've spent my whole life wondering if I had any siblings, and now here we are, Henry finished, his voice trembling. I can't believe it either. All these years I've wondered about you. Josephine sat down next to Henry, her eyes filled with a mix of joy and sadness. I always hoped that one day we'd find you, Richard. When we adopted Henry, we were told about his twin, but the adoption records were sealed. We had no way of finding you. Richard ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to process everything. My adoptive parents always told me I had a brother, but they didn't have much information either. They said we were separated shortly after birth. Henry leaned forward, his eyes locked on Richard. Do you remember anything about our birth parents? Richard shook his head. No, I don't. I was too young. My adoptive parents said they were told our birth mother couldn't take care of us, so we were put up for adoption. Josephine placed a gentle hand on Richard's arm. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but now that you're here, we can make up for lost time. You're part of this family, Richard, if you want to be. Richard looked around the room, taking in the opulence and warmth of Josephine's home. I would like that. I've always wondered what it would be like to have a family. Henry's face broke into a smile. Then it settled. You're staying with us, and we're going to make up for all the years we missed. As the initial shock wore off, the atmosphere in the room began to lighten. Josephine excused herself to prepare some refreshments, leaving the three of us alone. Richard and Henry continued to talk, their conversations moving from the serious to the mundane. So, what do you do for a living? Henry asked. I work in marketing, Richard replied. It's a decent job, but it doesn't really fulfill me. I've been thinking about making a change for a while now. Henry nodded. I'm an architect. I love designing buildings, creating something out of nothing. Maybe you can find something you're passionate about too. Richard smiled. Maybe. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Josephine returned with a tray of tea and cookies, setting it down on the coffee table. I thought we could all use something warm to drink, she said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. Thank you, Aunt Josephine, I said, taking a cup. This is exactly what we need right now. As we sipped our tea, the conversation turned to lighter topics. Henry and Richard shared childhood stories, comparing notes on their different upbringings. I listened, feeling a sense of joy at seeing them connect. You know, Henry said, grinning, when I was a kid, I used to build these elaborate forts out of blankets and pillows. I'd spend hours perfecting them. Richard laughed. I did the same thing. My parents used to call me the fort master. I guess some things run in the family. Josephine watched them with a contented smile. It's wonderful to see you two bonding. This is what I always hoped for. As the evening wore on, the conversation continued to flow. We talked about our interests, our dreams, and our plans for the future. The initial shock of the reunion had given way to a sense of excitement and possibility. Later, as we sat by the fireplace, Richard turned to me. Eleanor, I can't thank you enough for bringing me here. If it weren't for you, I never would have found my brother. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my heart. It was fate, I think. Everything happens for a reason. He reached out and took my hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. I'm just glad I was there to help you that night. It's changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Henry joined us by the fire, a thoughtful expression on his face. This is just the beginning, he said. We have so much to catch up on, so many memories to make. I'm looking forward to it. Richard nodded, his eyes shining with hope. Me too, Henry. Me too. As we sat together, the warmth of the fire wrapping around us, I knew that this was the start of something beautiful. A new beginning for all of us, filled with hope, love, and the promise of a bright future. The days following Richard's arrival were filled with a flurry of activity and emotion. Josephine took great care to ensure that Richard felt welcome, and Henry and I did our best to make him feel at home. There was an unspoken understanding that this was a precious opportunity for all of us, and we were determined to make the most of it. One afternoon, Josephine decided it was time to share the full story of how Henry and Richard had been separated. She gathered us all in the living room, the air thick with anticipation. Henry and Richard sat next to each other on the plush sofa, their identical features highlighted by the soft afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Thank you all for being here," Josephine began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "There's a lot you both need to know about your past. I think it's time to finally reveal the truth." Henry and Richard exchanged glances, their curiosity evident. I leaned forward, eager to hear the story that had remained hidden for so long. Josephine took a deep breath and began. "When you were born, your mother was very young and unmarried. She came from a poor background and couldn't take care of 2 babies on her own. She made the heartbreaking decision to give you up for adoption, hoping that you would have better lives with families who could provide for you. She loved you both very much," Josephine continued, her eyes misting with tears. "But she knew she couldn't give you the life you deserved, so she made arrangements through an agency that specialized in finding good homes for children. Unfortunately, the agency couldn't find a family willing to take in both of you together." Richard's eyes widened. "So we were separated because they couldn't find someone to adopt us both." Josephine nodded. "Yes, it was a decision made out of necessity, not choice. Henry was adopted first, by my husband and me. We were overjoyed to have him as part of our family. We knew he had a twin brother, but the adoption records were sealed, and we had no way of finding you." Henry's expression softened. "So all this time you knew I had a brother, but you couldn't find him?" "Yes," Josephine said, her voice trembling. "We tried to find you, Richard, but there were too many obstacles. The agency wouldn't release any information, and we hit dead ends at every turn. It was a constant heartache for us." Richard's face was a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I always felt like a part of me was missing. My adoptive parents were wonderful, but there was always this emptiness, this sense that I wasn't complete." Henry reached out and placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. "We're together now. We can make up for lost time." Josephine smiled through her tears. "I never gave up hope that one day you two would find each other. And now that you have, we can finally be a complete family." Richard looked at Josephine, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for telling us the truth. It means a lot to know where we come from and why things happened the way they did." Josephine nodded. "You both deserve to know. And now that you do, we can move forward together." The room fell silent for a moment as we all absorbed the weight of the story. It was a lot to take in, but there was also a sense of relief, a sense that the missing pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Henry broke the silence. "Richard, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. What was your life like growing up? I want to know everything." Richard smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "My adoptive parents were kind and loving. They always supported me and encouraged me to pursue my dreams. But like I said, there was always this feeling of incompleteness. I used to imagine what it would be like to have a brother, to share my life with someone who understood me in a way no one else could." Henry's eyes brightened. "Well, now you don't have to imagine anymore. We have a lot of catching up to do, and I can't wait to learn more about you." Josephine stood up, her face glowing with pride. "I'm so proud of both of you. This is the beginning of a new chapter for our family, and I'm so grateful that we're all together." I watched as Richard and Henry continued to talk, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. There was still much to learn and many questions to be answered, but for now, the most important thing was that they had found each other. The truth had been revealed, and with it came a sense of hope and possibility for the future. The weeks that followed Richard's arrival were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Josephine's mansion buzzed with the energy of new beginnings. Richard and Henry spent hours talking, sharing stories about their childhoods, interests, and dreams. It was as if they were trying to make up for the years they had lost in just a few short weeks. One evening, Josephine decided to host a family dinner to celebrate the reunion. She invited close family friends and relatives, wanting everyone to share in the joy of this newfound connection. The dining room was beautifully decorated, the long table set with Josephine's finest china and crystal. As we gathered around the table, the atmosphere was filled with warmth and excitement. Josephine stood at the head of the table, raising her glass in a toast. To family, she said, her voice filled with emotion. To the bonds that connect us and the love that brings us together. I am so grateful to have my family complete. Welcome home, Richard. Welcome home, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Richard smiled, his eyes shining. Thank you, everyone. This means more to me than I can put into words. I've spent my life wondering where I belonged, and now I know. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. Henry clapped Richard on the back. We're glad you're here too, brother. It's like we've always known each other. Dinner was a lively affair, filled with laughter and conversation. Stories were shared and memories were made. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned to future plans. Richard, Josephine said, her eyes twinkling, have you thought about what you'd like to do now that you're here? You mentioned you were thinking about making a change in your career. Richard nodded. I've been thinking about it a lot. I enjoy marketing, but it doesn't fulfill me the way I hoped it would. Being here with all of you has made me realize that I want to do something more meaningful. Henry leaned forward, his interest piqued. Have you considered working with children? Maybe something in social work or education? Richard smiled thoughtfully. Actually, I have. I've always enjoyed helping others, and I think working with children could be very rewarding. I just didn't know how to get started. Josephine's face lit up. We have a family friend who runs a nonprofit organization that focuses on helping underprivileged children. I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you and give you some guidance. That sounds amazing, Richard said, his excitement growing. I'd love to learn more about it. As the evening drew to a close, Josephine suggested a walk in the garden. We all agreed, eager to stretch our legs and enjoy the cool night air. The garden was beautifully lit, the soft glow of lanterns casting a warm light over the flowers and shrubs. Richard and Henry walked ahead, their voices carrying back to us as they continued their conversation. Josephine and I followed, taking in the beauty of the garden. I'm so happy to see them together, Josephine said, her voice soft. It's like a dream come true. It really is, I agreed. They're so similar, yet they've had such different lives. It's amazing how they've connected so quickly. Josephine nodded. Family bonds are strong, even when separated by time and distance. I'm grateful that they've found each other and that we can all be a part of this journey. As we rounded a corner, we found Richard and Henry standing by a small pond, their reflections shimmering in the water. Look at this, Henry said, pointing to the pond. Remember when we used to go fishing with Dad? We'd spend hours trying to catch something, but we'd always end up with nothing but stories. Richard laughed. I remember. I used to go fishing with my adoptive dad, too. It was one of our favorite things to do together. It's funny how we had similar experiences, even though we were apart. Henry smiled. I guess some things are just in our blood. Richard turned to Josephine, his expression serious. Thank you for everything. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've made me feel welcome and loved. I can't thank you enough for that. Josephine's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to thank me, Richard. Your family and family takes care of each other. I'm just glad we have this chance to be together. Richard hugged her tightly. I'm glad too. More than you know. As we stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the garden and the warmth of family, I realized that this was just the beginning. The bonds that had been formed and strengthened over the past few weeks were only the start of a lifetime of love and connection. We were a family, bound by more than blood, and nothing could ever change that. The night sky stretched above us, dotted with stars, and I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. This was where we belonged together, facing the future with hope and love backslash. The first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I awoke to the gentle sound of birds chirping outside, a new day full of possibilities ahead. Today marked a significant turning point for our family, and the excitement was palpable throughout Josephine's mansion. Richard had decided to pursue a new career path, inspired by his conversations with Henry and Josephine. He was going to meet with the director of the nonprofit organization Josephine had mentioned. This opportunity promised not only a fulfilling career, but also a chance to make a real difference in the lives of underprivileged children. I joined the family in the dining room for breakfast. Josephine was already there, sipping her tea and reading the morning paper. Henry was discussing architectural plans with Richard, who looked both nervous and excited. "Good morning, everyone," I greeted, taking a seat beside Richard. "Are you ready for your big day?" Richard smiled, though there was a hint of anxiety in his eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be. It's a big change, but I'm excited." Henry clapped him on the back. "You'll do great, brother. Just be yourself and show them how passionate you are about helping others." Josephine looked up from her paper, her face beaming with pride. "Remember, Richard, you're not alone in this. We're all here to support you." As breakfast continued, the conversation was filled with words of encouragement and advice. The family's unwavering support seemed to bolster Richard's confidence, and by the time we finished, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Later that morning, Richard and I headed out to the nonprofit organization. The building was modest but welcoming, with a large sign that read Bright Futures Foundation. Richard took a deep breath before pushing the door open, and we stepped inside. The receptionist greeted us with a warm smile. "Hello, how can I help you today?" "Hi, I'm Richard, and this is Eleanor. I have a meeting with Ms. Thompson." "Of course, Mr. Richard. She's expecting you. Please follow me." We were led to a cozy office where Ms. Thompson, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, welcomed us. "Richard, Eleanor, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please have a seat." Richard and I sat down, and Miss Thompson began to speak. "Josephine told me a lot about you, Richard. She said you're interested in making a career change and that you have a passion for helping children." Richard nodded. "Yes, I've always wanted to do something meaningful with my life. Hearing about the work you do here inspired me to take this step." Miss Thompson smiled. "That's wonderful to hear. We're always looking for passionate individuals who want to make a difference. Let's talk about your background and how your skills can contribute to our mission." The conversation flowed easily as Richard shared his experiences in marketing and his desire to work with children. Ms. Thompson was impressed by his enthusiasm and willingness to learn. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that this was the start of something promising. Ms. Thompson stood up and extended her hand. "Welcome to Bright Futures Foundation, Richard. We're thrilled to have you on board." Richard shook her hand, a look of relief and joy on his face. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I won't let you down." As we left the office, Richard turned to me, his eyes shining with excitement. "I can't believe it, Eleanor. This is really happening." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. "You deserve this, Richard. You're going to do amazing things." Over the next few weeks, Richard settled into his new role at the foundation. He quickly became a beloved member of the team, his genuine care for the children and his innovative ideas making a significant impact. Henry, Josephine, and I visited often, volunteering our time and supporting Richard in any way we could. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, Richard shared his experiences with us. "Today, I helped organize a mentorship program for the older kids. It's incredible to see how much they benefit from having someone to look up to." Henry nodded. "That's fantastic, Richard. You're giving them something they might never have had otherwise." Josephine smiled warmly. "You're making such a difference, Richard. I'm so proud of you." Richard looked around the room, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. Your support means everything to me." Henry grinned. "We're family, Richard. We stick together." Josephine raised her glass. "To new beginnings and the bonds that keep us strong." To new beginnings, we echoed, clinking our glasses together. As the evening wore on, we talked and laughed, the sense of togetherness filling the room. The journey that had brought us to this point had been unexpected and sometimes challenging, but it had also been deeply rewarding. We had found each other, discovered truths about our past, and forged bonds that would last a lifetime. Richard's new beginning was more than just a career change. It was a testament to the power of family and the importance of following one's heart. As I looked around at my family, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, united by love and the unbreakable ties that bound us.